So the big old building behind me, this is the old police headquarters. This was like the main police station back in the good old days of Portland. And the reason I'm starting my video here today is because the brazenness of a murderer who to this day we don't know who it was. It's an unsolved murder case. The police headquarters here are located at the intersection of 2nd and Oak Street. And way back in 1893, we're going back to 1893, there was a murder that happened at 2nd and Pine, which means some killer was brazen enough to murder somebody 1 block away from Portland's police station. Alright, so back here, back half of the building, that's the old police headquarters. And as far as the articles I've seen, all the articles I could find on this case, and there aren't many, all are from November 11th, 1893. Because the crime happened on the evening of November 10th. And it actually happened, reportedly as I understand it, right in front of where this building now stands. This is the Hazeltine building. I don't remember if it was here in 1893. I know it's a very old building. I know the construction date is on it, but it was right in this vicinity where this crime happened. And there's an old lamp post here, which is perfect for this story. You know, I was mentioning the brazenness of a criminal who would murder someone only a block from the police station. The body of this woman was discovered at the base of an old light post, or it would have been an old light post now. I shouldn't say it was old back then. And light posts weren't super common in 1893. There just happens to be a light post in front of the building, because this would have been like right where it would have been at, would have been just right along this stretch. They said it was in front of where this building is today, near the intersection of 2nd and Pine. Wow. So I went across the street because I thought the construction date was on the building, and it is 1893. So this building was built the same year that this crime happened, and since this crime happened in November, this building was probably only recently finished being constructed. So what happened here on November 10th, 1893? A 23-year-old woman named Gong Fa, she's a Chinese woman, rumored to possibly be a prostitute in this area. She was discovered in a gutter, 2nd and Pine Street, vicinity of the Hazeltine building right behind me. And again, police quarters right there. It's a bizarre case. She had had her throat slashed with such ferocity that she was almost decapitated when she was discovered. It seems nobody heard anything, nothing happened that attracted people to this scene, and yet, you know, I mean, we're in the heart of Old Town Portland right now. This place was bustling even in the 1890s. So it's crazy to think that somebody would have done something like that right here, right one of the most bustling parts of town, right by the police station, right in the vicinity. Presuming Gong Fa was killed roughly where she was found. She was found sitting under a light post, almost like whoever did it put her out there for all to see come nightfall. The murder weapon, presumably, because there was a knife that was discovered that had been left under her. So this is one of the most cockiest killers I've ever seen, who kills someone right by the police station in the vicinity of not only the public, but also this was primarily Chinese immigrants that lived in this area at the time. So, you know, you would have been killing someone who is native to the main population base of this area. And then to, like, intentionally, it seems, leave the murder weapon right there, but almost playing with authorities, putting it under the body. So, like, it's a stark surprise when you find it, or something that's totally unexpected. And there are obvious potential racial ramifications to this story. It's the 1890s. The bulk of Portland's Chinese and Japanese and Asian population as a whole have all been shoved in this direction. We're just a couple we're like 2 blocks from Chinatown, Portland's Chinatown. And you have a young Chinese woman who is murdered viciously in an area that is predominantly people that are the same race as her, and yet she is discovered by a random white man. That's how it's described in newspapers. A white man actually discovered her body first. And when she was found, obviously police were called and they reported to the scene quickly because the police station's right there. And by the time they got there, her body was still warm, and they deemed that she'd only been dead for about 5 minutes. Maybe a few more, honestly, but that means literally this white man, who remains unnamed, probably discovered this murder victim within 5 minutes or less of her death having occurred. So there's this strange, interesting white guy just walking through an area that's predominantly Chinese immigrants, and that was a stigma at the time. It wasn't just that the white populace was racist towards the Chinese, but they didn't even want to commingle with them. White people did not wander through neighborhoods that were primarily Chinese or Japanese or African American, people who weren't white. They often completely avoided those areas, and yet you've got this one guy stumbling upon a crime scene that violent, literally within minutes of it happening. So was this guy a perpetrator? Did he think, you know, I'll do this. They'll never think me, the one white guy in the area, the white Portland police, they'll never think that I was the one who did this. So did he do it and then fake like he discovered the crime scene to make himself look innocent, and they just never ever considered him as the possible guilty party? Maybe. So all things considered, I think the general idea about what happened here was, the working theory was whoever did this likely snuck up behind Gong Fa, probably put his hands over her mouth and cut her throat real quickly, let her drop, and then sprinted away. That could explain why nobody heard any screams. There was no struggle. It was a grab, slit, and you disappear. And a theory beyond what I was suggesting earlier about this guy just being a brazen criminal, so brazen that he would, like, leave the murder weapon at the scene of the crime. The other idea was this guy maybe didn't want to be seen walking away from the crime scene with a knife on him, so he let it drop under her body as she fell to the ground, concealing the weapon, and then leaving the scene looking like just another person. So again, was it this white guy that walked away from the scene and then came back a few minutes later to make the identification? And yet it's just so strange that this 1 in a million white guy, when there's all these Chinese immigrants around, he's the one that would find the body first and not a local to this area. And another reason it actually makes sense that it seems after a few articles were posted about this crime the day after it happened, that it just kind of disappeared and never really showed up in newspapers again, because it was just a young Chinese person getting killed. And in the eyes of the general populace of Portland, the people that controlled the city, the people that controlled the media, nobody really cared. And for reasons that shouldn't be mysterious, the Chinese immigrant population around here didn't trust the police, which were predominantly white guys that in turn didn't really care about them. So, you know, I found no information suggesting any actual suspects. The one that I'm the most suspicious about is this white guy that found the body, who I guarantee never came under suspicion. And so it should come as no surprise that this was a crime that the police were generally disinterested in solving. They really probably couldn't care less. They just assumed it was somebody else who lived in the area committing a crime on someone else. Never really suggested the possibility it could be a white person. And Gong Fa, again, reportedly was working as a prostitute. So this case was completely swept under the rug. Tragically, there was practically no effort ever made to determine who did this. Gong Fa was a woman. she was of Chinese descent, and she was working as a prostitute. That was essentially 3 reasons to not really care about the crime. But I did, reading from the book, I think it was Murder and Mayhem in Prohibition Portland, written by J.D. Chandler, who I've had, local historian who I've had the pleasure of meeting before. He discussed this briefly while he was talking about a lot of the gang wars that were going on in this area, gangland killings happening in the Portland's Chinese neighborhoods. He addressed a possible motive for Gong Fa ending up dead in a gutter back there at Pine and 2nd. The idea was that she had a husband who she maybe had a strained marriage with. Maybe he wasn't ecstatic about the idea that she was working as a prostitute and having sex with other men besides him. And this conflict over who owned her, I made sure to put that in quotes, because the idea was her husband felt he had full control over her, whereas, you know, if she's allowing herself to be a prostitute, men are going to say, well, I'm paying for you, so for that time period you belong to me. And again, she's an immigrant and a woman, so a lot of men are going to deem her property to some extent or another. And essentially it could have been a lover or her husband who killed her out of mad jealousy. I think it's probably something along those lines. I wasn't able to find any information. I mean, again, you barely find any articles about this as it is. I didn't find any articles, any information about her husband, so I don't really know how valid of a suspect he would be. It seems like they didn't. I mean, I feel like, you know, the police's attitude was probably just some other Chinese person killed this woman. So you'd think if there was really even a marginal amount of stuff to go on in terms of her husband doing it, the police would have just put it on him. You know, taken care of, done, shut. We don't care. Get rid of this case. We don't care. So I question that. I think it's much more likely that some guy had picked her up, you know, as a prostitute, and something happened. He either wanted her to do something she didn't want to do, something along those lines, and it led to a scuffle, and the guy lost it and murdered her. I mean, if it's just some random white guy, he doesn't care. And if he's a white man who feels like he controls this woman who's also a Chinese immigrant, and we have no respect for them anyway in Portland during that time, he probably felt like she was a piece of property, and therefore if he attacked her and cut her throat and ran away, I totally see a man doing something like that to a woman like Gong Fa at that time. So I think it was probably a guy who picked her up, something happened, or she had wronged him in some way, and he came back around later to exact revenge. Unfortunately, sometimes a common occurrence around here. There's a lot of things going on in this part of town, a lot of drug use, and unfortunately people dying from time to time. But yeah, I think it was probably a John, if you use that term, who was exacting revenge on Gong Fa for something. She'd wronged him, she'd embarrassed him. Even if she rejected him, he would take it as a form of embarrassment, even if nobody else ever had to know about it. He had to know about it. It would have to eat away at him. There's the slight possibility that this may have just been some crazy, kooky white racist who saw an opportunity to attack a young Chinese immigrant woman, but I don't know, that feels kind of thin. But obviously it would have to be something that was either someone just instantaneously just snapped, or somebody, it seems like it had to be planned. This person had to have a weapon on them, and they snuck up on her. So this wasn't just a scuffle happened and he pulled out a knife and stabbed her. This was some form of pre-planning had to be involved. If this guy was going to have a weapon and was going to sneak up behind her, because that's what seems like happened. She didn't scream, there was no signs of a struggle, it seemed real quick. So that's my theory about what happened. But to this day, I mean, over 125 years later, this case has never been solved, and it probably never will be, because the people that were in power at the time who had the best chance of solving it couldn't care less about it because it wasn't a white person. That's the real kind of tragic overall tragic element to the story, and that is the horrible, brutal, near decapitation murder of Gong Fa in Portland's Old Town area. So, for how tragic it was, I hope you enjoyed this newest installment in my series, Historic Murders of Portland. Remember to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Hit up my Patreon if you so choose. And till next time, from Old Town, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian. And I'll see you next time.